Hey guys, SGT here with a very special silver update featuring Chris Duane and David Morgan. As we all know, the Fed has announced it will continue its zero interest rate policy through 2014, which means the printing presses will continue to run unabated. For many of us who've been stacking silver for a very long time, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the value of 1 ounce of physical silver. In part 7 of his Silver Bullet and the Silver Shield series, Chris Duane points out that the historical wage for 1 day of hard human labor was always around 1/10 of an ounce of silver. Today, because of the banking cartel's massive paper price suppression of silver, 1/10 of an ounce of silver, when measured in today's dollars, is only worth about $3.50. Through their decades-long paper price suppression schemes, the banking cartel has managed to keep the price of silver, in today's dollars, unimaginably low. The paper Ponzi monetary paradigm under which we live is solely responsible for this historic anomaly. The banksters have handed those of us who are awake and aware of their machinations an unbelievable gift. Millions of Americans work for minimum wage, which is around $8 per hour. Millions more can't find jobs at all. But let's take the average 8 hours workday as an example and multiply it by that $8 an hour figure. What we find is that millions of American workers are being paid $64 in exchange for a day of their labor. So what is the real price of 1 physical ounce of silver supposed to be? I've done some quick math, and it seems to me that Chris Duane's 1/10 of an ounce figure is spot on. So now, let's go to Chris Duane for his take.
Nobody knows better than Chris Duane the value of silver in today's dollars. Chris, welcome back, and could you please flesh out your concept for us about 1/10 of an ounce of silver is the historical norm which workers were paid?
Sure. When I started researching silver, I couldn't help but to go back to the historical references that, put value upon silver. And I think one of the things that stuck most with me was that 12 hours of hard human labor was equal to 1/10 of an ounce of silver. And, these stories go all the way back to the Roman times. Roman soldiers, field workers were paid, a denarius, which is the equivalent of our, mercury dimes or our silver dimes of yesteryear. And it's amazing to me that silver dime translated not only during Roman times, but also labor workers or factory workers at the turn of the century. And even if you think about it, 2/3 of the world today lives off of less than $2 a day, which is less than 1/10 of an ounce of silver. So here we have almost 99% of all of humanity that's ever existed has lived, eaten, breathed with this value of 1/10 of an ounce of silver being equal to their work. And to go back and see that, and then see how we value silver today in this paper fiat Ponzi scheme that we live in, and to see that, throughout all of history and 2/3 of the world today, 1/10 of an ounce of silver meant your day's worth of work.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, let me ask you this. I want to read you this, and then you tell me if I'm off on these numbers. So my question, Chris, is what is the real price for 1 physical ounce of silver supposed to be? Because as John Williams has noted, the inflation-adjusted all-time high in silver using the real monetary supply figures is now around $500 per ounce. And if we consider that millions of Americans work for $8 an hour and make $64 a day, if it weren't for the paper-suppressed price of silver, if silver were really trading at that inflation-adjusted all-time high of $500, that $64 a day in compensation equates to about 1/8 of an ounce of silver. Not far off from your figures of 1/10 of an ounce.
Yeah, I agree with John Williams with the shadow stats. I mean, the government has been lying to us about inflation for so long. I mean, they'll say that inflation's running at 2%, when in fact it's running at 10+%. And when you compound that over years of understating inflation, the real inflation adjustment high for silver is about $500. But even if you use the government's inflation-adjusted numbers, silver would have to be at $132 an ounce just to get back to its old high in 1980. And can anybody name me anything that's cheaper now than it was back in 1980?
Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. And before we jump over to David Morgan, why don't you tell us a little bit about these price suppression schemes? Because my take is the banking cartel has managed to keep the price of silver in today's dollars and by historical standards unimaginably low. The paper Ponzi monetary paradigm under which we live is solely responsible for this historic anomaly. And I think that's your message, isn't it? People need to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity so that they can buy physical silver at these historically low prices. $35 an ounce for a physical ounce of silver is unimaginably cheap, isn't it?
It is. And I think what people don't quite get is why it's being held down. And the simple reason is because we have privately held central banks whose power comes from their ability to print money. If there's ever another currency out there that would provide real tangible value and have, be where people would throw their efforts behind, it would destroy the power that they have in the printing press. They also have the politicians who have the power, who also gain power from spending that money. Politicians would be restrained in their spending and their wars and their social programs and everything else that they do if they had a hard money system like a gold and silver standard. And what also people don't quite understand is this has been going on for over 100 years. This isn't something that is of a recent time. If you go back to the crime of 1873 and the Coinage Act and the demonetization of silver, there's actually been a war on silver for 138 years where the bankers and the politicians do not want us to have honest money. But this game is coming to an end, folks. All of the physical silver that's ever been mined throughout all of human history has been used and abused and destroyed as an industrial metal. And we're getting to the point where there's a mathematically inevitable collapse of their paper Ponzi scheme, combined with the fact that there are no more silver inventory out there.
Thanks, man. Always good to talk with you.
All right, bud.
Talk soon.
All right, take care.
Guys, don't forget to check out Don'tTreadOn.me for Chris Duane's wonderful work. And now let's bridge over to David Morgan from themorganreport.com, because there's been a lot of talk about hyperinflation. Both James Turk and John Williams have said that due to the monetary policies of the Fed, hyperinflation in the United States is now absolutely guaranteed. John Williams of ShadowStats issued a warning that was posted at KWN, and I just want to read it real quick. Quote, "The U.S. economic and systematic solvency crisis of the last 5 years continues to deteriorate, yet they remain just the precursors to the Great Collapse, a hyperinflationary Great Depression." So now let's turn to David Morgan from themorganreport.com. David, thanks for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, what's your take on hyperinflation? Do you see hyperinflation as inevitable?
Yeah, it can be a semantics game, and I certainly want to be clear in my thinking here. First of all, to have a currency crisis, you don't need hyperinflation. Now, the idea of hyperinflation is primarily two that come to mind for most people are the Weimar Republic in 1923,
right,
in Germany, and Zimbabwe recently.
Right.
And there have been other ones. A currency crisis is where you have a distrust in the currency to the point that the currency is shunned. Now, obviously, you've had a currency crisis in Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic. The point I'm making is that in advanced capital markets like we have in the United States, it's a credit problem or a debt problem, as I often refer to it, and that is that the debt cannot be paid off. It's absolutely mathematically impossible. The bond market is much larger than the equity markets. Whenever interest rates get pushed up, bond prices go down, and that is a self-regulating mechanism. In other words, this is what happened in the last gold bull market, was that it wasn't the market that took interest rates sky high. It was Paul Volcker stepped in and arbitrarily set interest rates at bone-crushing levels. He set the T-bill rate, I think it was 17.5%, and the long bond along the same line. So huge amount of deflationary pressure in the markets at the time, because as interest rates go up, again, bond prices go down. That is highly deflationary when you have bond prices going down, because there's far more money in the debt markets than there is in the equity markets. So that's why I don't think you'll have a hyperinflation, but that does not mean you won't have a currency crisis. In my view, all that would really have to happen in the near term, meaning, as John Williams said, in the next couple of years or so, is for the United States to pay, the same price for gasoline as the rest of the world. Most Americans don't realize what a good deal they have as far as being subsidized on some of these prices they pay for food and energy.
Yeah, you make a great point, because if folks have to endure 20% or 25% or 30% annual inflation, that's not technically hyperinflation, but boy, it's devastating to the bottom line if you're not getting commensurate raises in your salary. So for the American folks who are already struggling, if we have to see that kind of inflation, it will be devastating, and that's not anywhere near hyperinflation.
No, I'm glad you made the point. You made it more succinctly than me, and I think that's more likely the case. And that is, and at some point, there could be a nation state like China or whomever that says, we don't accept your debt anymore. we're not buying it, again forcing up interest rates and maybe selling off the bond. Well, if that's if something is being sold rapidly, it takes the price down. So again, you could get a huge deflationary pressure at the same time that the interest rates to do business or the depreciation of the currency is coming up simultaneously. So you're losing money in the bond market. At the same time, you've got these 20% deterioration in the currency year over year. So it's the worst of all worlds. There's not really a lot of difference between a hyperinflationary and inflationary, let me call it an inflationary depression, and a debt liquidating depression. In an inflationary depression, you have huge unemployment, you have volatile markets, you have no stability, you have a great deal of concerns. And in a deflationary depression or debt liquidating depression, you have the same thing. The only difference really is what happens to the money. In a deflationary debt liquidating depression, the money becomes more valuable. In a hyperinflationary depression or inflationary depression, the money becomes worthless. So now you have to define money. And the way I define money is real money, silver and gold. So in that context, silver and gold will remain valuable and purchase the same amount of goods and services, or probably more, because there's been so much distortions in the market. Whereas in a debt liquidating depression, paper money could become more valuable, and that's basically like some of the deflationist arguments. I don't buy that argument for the simple reason that it would be the first time in recorded history that a paper product trumped gold. It's never happened before. I don't think it'll happen again, but I want to be clear. I'm not 100% absolutely sure. I leave room open in my mind for that idea that it could happen, but I doubt it will happen. But that's their argument, that for the first time in monetary history, under these kind of conditions, you're going to see where, a physical dollar bill, so to speak, is going to actually be what you want versus something that stood the test of time for 5,000 years.
Just for fun, before we let you go, would you want to put on your Nostradamus hat and take a stab at a 2014 price for physical silver?
Sure. So far, I was very early in the 2000s predicting we would see a minimum of triple digits, $100 silver. I still maintain that as a minimum. I think we probably get somewhere between the $150 to the $200 level. We really should see not nominally, a real all-time high.
Sure.
And so, I'm actually being conservative. We'll see. I don't try to get too hung up on the paper price again. I think you really should try to do a paradigm shift in your mind and look at what does an ounce buy, what does 100 ounces buy, that type of thing, and try to get yourself prepared for that kind of thinking. It really isn't, in my view, going to be a real, fun world when silver's moving into the $100 range and beyond. Same thing with gold being in the $2,500 range and beyond. I think it's going to be indicative and a very clear picture for most people that are awake and aware of just how distorted the capital markets have become. And hopefully there'll be a way out of this thing that isn't too painful for too long. But unfortunately, the political will at this point doesn't indicate that.
All right, David, thanks so much. We will talk again soon. Thanks for all your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's it, guys. My thanks to David Morgan and Chris Duane for their time, and my thanks to all of you for listening. And until we talk again, keep stacking. Good night.